So it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and as I looked around at the other travelers on our bus, I saw row after row of weary faces and half-closed eyes. It had been a long morning for our group of walking and listening to our tour guide describe the holy sites around the Sea of Galilee. We had been in and out of churches, on and off the bus, and we still had one more stop to make before we could get back to the hotel. I didn't think we were going to make it. But then, some movement caught my eye. My mother had begun to pass around a bag of colorful Jolly Ranchers and round white peppermints. She had broken into her emergency sugar stash. My mother never travels without one. It was odd this one was devoid of chocolate, but so it was that day. And so, like a dolphin surfacing over the waves, I watched that bag pop up above the bus seats and then disappear down into a new set of hands as it was passed back and forth between the rows of seats, a burst of sugar to reinvigorate our weary brains. And then other bags began to surface as other people dug into their own stash of snacks. "Try these dates I got at the fruit stand back there," a voice in front of me said. "Taste these orange slices. They are so juicy," came another. Pretzels, granola bars, pomegranate seeds joined this feast, moving through our bus seats. When the bus finally stopped at our next destination, our group piled out with renewed energy, and the remaining Jolly Ranchers returned to my mom's bag. In this lesson from Mark, it is late in the afternoon. Jesus had been teaching and healing all day, but the crowd is still gathered all around the hillside. The disciples are tired because it has been a long day. "Jesus, we think it's time to call it a day," the disciples say. "You better send these people away so they can get something to eat." And Jesus looks at the disciples and says, "You give them something to eat." Well, this leaves the disciples puzzled because they have nothing. They have no food. There are no takeout restaurants in sight. Not that they could pay for this much food anyway. So they stare out at this hungry mass of people that is beginning to look more and more like they could turn into a hungry mob. So the disciples say, "We have nothing. We have 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus says, "Bring your nothing to me. Bring me your nothing." He blesses the fish and the bread. And the disciples start to pass what they have among the crowd. And like that bag of Jolly Ranchers popping up and down the bus seats, baskets of bread and fish begin to make their way back through the crowd. And soon everyone is filled. And there's some left over for the next time the crowd needs to be fed. The disciples thought they had nothing to give. And Jesus says, "Just bring me what you have." And he blesses it. And their nothing becomes more than enough. So earlier this summer, many of us learned a new weather term, derecho, when a series of powerful thunderstorms with hurricane-force winds swept across Iowa and parts of the Midwest, destroying their crops and their property and leaving many without power for days. In Belle Plaine, Iowa, when the winds grew quiet, the pastor and members of First Congregational United Church of Christ started to ask how they could help. The day after the storm, Reverend Kate West, the pastor of First Congregational, gathered enough supplies to pack 100 bag lunches with sandwiches, bottled water, chips, and a fruit cup. Well, those 100 lunches disappeared in about an hour, so Reverend West assembled and distributed another 200 that day. She shared her story on Facebook, and soon others arrived with supplies and encouragement. By the end of that first week, they were assembling and distributing 800 lunches a day in Belle Plaine and the neighboring communities. A team from nearby St. Paul's UCC in Oskaloosa arrived the following Monday with 1,000 bag lunches, words of encouragement, and other supplies. Within the week, a truck of disaster cleanup kits arrived from the disaster coordinator of the Kansas-Oklahoma Conference, and a volunteer from another local UCC church made 2 trips to Belle Plaine to deliver cleaning supplies, tarps, and chainsaws. When the church's power was finally restored, they became the temporary home for a group of trained rescue and recovery volunteers from Union College. Their training and equipment allowed them to help 30 families before returning to the college, help that was only possible because the church was willing to share their building. First Congregational Church is not a large congregation. They average 11 people in Sunday worship. And the storm left damage to all of their homes. But they offered up the space and resources they had, and it became rest and relief and community in the midst of a disaster. Jesus says, "Bring me what you have," and with his blessing, it can become more than enough. When the disciples looked out at the hungry faces of the crowd on that hillside, all they could see were obstacles and excuses. This need is too great. There are too many hungry people and too few of us. We don't have enough time, Jesus. We don't have enough money, Jesus. We don't have enough energy, Jesus. We don't have enough food. All they could see was what they didn't have. All they could see in that moment was scarcity. But Jesus sees something else. Jesus sees possibility. And so Jesus gives them a new perspective. Just bring me what you have, Jesus says. And when we bring what we have, Jesus stretches out his hands to bless it. And then, suddenly, there is enough time. There is enough food. There is enough energy. In fact, there is more than enough. There is an overflowing abundance, more than anyone sitting on that hillside could have imagined. And that is what we call a miracle. But it is a miracle that begins when we dare to bring Jesus whatever it is that we have and trust that with his blessing, it will always be more than enough. Amen.